I hadn't meant to linger outside her door. Honestly, I was just waiting for the girl next door to answer, the one who'd let me borrow sugar 3 weeks ago and never returned the favor. But then I noticed her, the woman I'd started noticing for months, without ever trying to. She was leaning against the railing across the hall, the late afternoon light catching the gray in her hair just enough to make it soft instead of striking. Her eyes flicked up as I shuffled my bag nervously. She didn't smile right away. She just nodded, small, careful, like she didn't want to startle anyone, or herself. "You left this," I said, holding up the sketchbook she'd forgotten at the cafe last week. It was warm in my hands, and for some reason I felt protective of it, like it held pieces of her I wasn't allowed to see. "Oh, thanks," she said, voice low, like it had to travel carefully across the hall to reach me. She reached for it, and our fingers brushed for a second that stretched too long. I looked away, pretending to check my phone, but I didn't send the text I'd been drafting for hours. I noticed the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, slow and habitual, like she wasn't aware anyone was watching. I noticed her shoulders, how they eased when I returned her sketchbook. I noticed the faint scent of coffee clinging to her coat, enough to make me remember every cafe we'd ever shared in passing. "You remember my usual?" she asked, nodding toward the thermos I'd brought, the one with my own coffee sloshing inside. I shrugged. "I think so." My words sounded clunky even to me. She smiled, small and private, and I felt the pull in my chest that had nothing to do with caffeine. We didn't talk about the girl I was waiting for. We didn't talk about anything important. There was a silence between us that hummed louder than any conversation. I wanted to ask if she wanted to come in for a minute, maybe talk about the sketches she drew, maybe about nothing at all. But I didn't. I only leaned on the railing and watched her hands. She folded them once, twice, then let them rest, palms down, like she'd forgotten what to do with them. Do you always carry one of these?" I nodded toward her sketchbook. "Almost," she said. "Helps me think." Her gaze lingered on mine for a beat longer than necessary. I noticed the way her lips pressed together, the small crease by her eye when she considered whether to step closer. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry detergent from the apartments below and the soft winter air brushing in through the open window. I felt a sudden quiet ache, not longing, exactly, just the subtle sting of noticing someone in a way that made every other face in the building blur. "I should go," I said too quickly. My bag felt heavier suddenly, like it held all my unsent words. She nodded but didn't move, just stood there, looking at me, the sketchbook still in her hands. Then she stepped forward, close enough for the faint scent of vanilla to reach me. She didn't speak. She only pressed her lips to mine, just for a second, not in a way that promised anything, but enough to make my chest hollow. I blinked, caught between surprise and instinct, and she pulled back, smoothing her hair, her eyes slightly amused, slightly uncertain. "I had to," she said, almost a whisper. I didn't answer. I wanted to, but all I could do was watch her retreat down the hall, leaving the door to my girlfriend's apartment just a few feet away, like a reminder that the world hadn't stopped. Only my heart had. I pulled out my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Just that brief, impossible kiss hanging in the air, quiet but deafening that I saw her again the next evening, leaning against the kitchen counter in her apartment, stirring tea as if she'd been doing it for years. I didn't knock. She had that small habit of leaving the door ajar, as if inviting, but only for those she didn't mind noticing her routines. "You came early," she said, not looking up. Her voice had that quiet edge that made everything ordinary feel heavier. "I wanted to return the thermos," I muttered, holding it like it carried my excuses. She glanced at it, then me, and smiled faintly. "You always think you have to return something." I shrugged. It was true. I liked returning things, finishing tasks. I liked neat endings. She, on the other hand, let moments hover, unfinished, like sketches left open on a page. We sat across from each other at her small wooden table, the steam from our mugs curling between us. I wanted to ask her about her life, about the divorce she never mentioned, about the quiet evenings she spent alone, but all I said was, "Does this tea have sugar?" She laughed softly. Not a full laugh, but enough to make the air shift. A little. Just enough to keep it from being sad. Her honesty caught me off guard. I realized I had been holding my own unsent truths, tiny confessions tucked in drafts and paused thoughts. And now here she was, spilling hers without ceremony, without expecting anything back. I wondered if I should feel guilty. She was mid-40s, divorced, with an independence that made her feel untouchable. And me, barely 20, fumbling over the same sentences. Dangerous, really. And yet, every glance she threw my way seemed to shrink that distance, if only for a second. I used to draw a lot as a kid, I admitted finally, surprising even myself. Mostly in notebooks I'd hide from my parents. Her head tilted, eyes soft. That sounds lonely. Maybe, I said, but also honest. You know, no pretending. She nodded, like she understood the kind of solitude that can both comfort and pinch at the edges of the heart. For a moment, we sat silently, the quiet punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I reached to adjust a sugar packet, but my hand brushed hers. Neither of us pulled away immediately. A small, accidental touch, but heavy with the weight of what we weren't saying. "You're different from everyone else," she said, half to herself, half to me. Her gaze lingered, teasing, searching. It didn't demand anything, yet it carried everything. I didn't answer. My chest tightened. All I could do was meet her eyes and let that unspoken understanding settle between us. Later, as I stood to leave, she held the door open a fraction longer than necessary. Our hands touched briefly on the frame, long enough that the warmth of her skin remained on mine, a quiet punctuation to the evening. I walked down the hall thinking about it, about her, about how small gestures could feel enormous. And I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't see her for a few days after that evening. I told myself it was nothing, just coincidence, but my routine felt off. Coffee tasted flat, the hall smelled emptier. When I did see her again, she was in the small courtyard, folding laundry on the line. I lingered at the gate, unsure if I should call out. The sunlight caught her hair in the same way it always did, softening the gray, softening everything. "Hey," I said finally, stepping closer. She looked up, blinked, and smiled faintly. Not quite warm, not quite distant. "Hey." I wanted to step closer. My chest tightened, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned against the railing and watched her hands fold the shirts. Small gestures, turning the sleeve inside out, smoothing the fabric, tugging at a stubborn sock, suddenly felt like language. "You've been avoiding me," she said, casually, like it was nothing. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say I hadn't, but my voice got stuck somewhere between the words. "Just busy, right?" she said. I was not leaving the laundry, but I could feel her watching me, the way she always did, in silence. For a moment, everything felt fragile. I imagined her noticing the way I rubbed the back of my neck, the way my fingers twitched as I tried to anchor myself. I imagined leaning closer, speaking the half-formed thoughts that had lived in my head all week. Then, footsteps. A neighbor, carrying groceries, smiled and waved. She stood straighter, tucked her hair behind her ear. I stepped back, embarrassed by my own anticipation. After he left, she said nothing, just handed me a folded shirt she'd finished. Our fingers brushed. My heart jumped. I wanted to say something stupid, something safe. "You don't have to do this." She looked at me, and for a second, I thought she might. She might lean in, speak, confess something small. Maybe even. Her eyes flicked past me, and she sighed softly, folding the next piece of laundry. She didn't lean in. She didn't pull away either. The tension lingered, electric, uncomfortable, familiar. I imagined her smiling at me in the quiet kitchen, imagined brushing hair behind her ear while I told her all the things I shouldn't. Imagine the kiss, what it would feel like, and immediately felt the weight of it, the risk, the impossibility. "You're quiet today?" she said finally. I nodded, swallowing a laugh I didn't trust. My hands were in my pockets, shifting awkwardly, wishing I could lean just a fraction closer without crossing a line I wasn't ready to name. She caught my gaze, held it a second too long. I thought about moving closer, leaning in, letting the moment slip past restraint. Then the laundry line flapped in the wind, a soft distraction, and the instant passed. We both knew it. The near kiss, the half confession, the pull that had no words. I walked away thinking about it, replaying it, wondering if she did too, if she noticed my hesitation, my longing, or if it was only mine to carry. We ended up on the bench outside the corner bookstore. I'd walked there on a whim, thinking maybe I'd find a new sketchbook, maybe distract myself. She appeared, carrying a tote bag heavy with papers, and sat beside me without asking. The distance between us felt charged, like static in the air, small but undeniable. "You came," she said softly. I wasn't sure if you'd be here," I admitted. My hands dug into my pockets, thumbs twisting, avoiding her eyes. She laughed quietly, not mocking, not amused, just small, real. "Unpredictable," she said. Her honesty pulled at me, like a thread I didn't want to tug too hard. I noticed the crease in her forehead, the way her fingers drummed the edge of her tote bag. She looked careful, guarded. I started, then stopped. What could I say? That I kept imagining her in small, impossible ways? That I thought about touching her hair or laughing with her late at night? That I worried, absurdly, that she might prefer someone else's company? She shifted, glancing down at the ground. "Do you ever feel like maybe we shouldn't?" She trailed off, the words unfinished, the weight heavy. I turned toward her. "I feel it," I said, quietly, honestly, "every time I see you. And I don't know what to do with it." Her gaze met mine, sharp, probing, but not accusatory. She let silence fill the space between us. A few pigeons cooed somewhere in the distance. Leaves scraped the pavement softly. The world went quiet around us. Or maybe it just felt that way. I wanted to confess. Something small. Something honest. "I think about you more than I should." Her hand brushed the edge of the bench near mine. Almost touching. Almost. I noticed it. The way her fingers lingered on the wood, hesitant. "You're younger," she said finally, almost to herself. "I can't. I shouldn't. Age doesn't matter." I blurted, then regretted it immediately. My words sounded too loud in the still air, too desperate. She didn't respond. She only let her eyes soften, and I could see the conflict there, the pull, the restraint. And maybe that was worse than words. I imagined leaning closer, bridging the inches between us, daring the small boundary that separated thought from action. I imagined her lips, her smell, the faint warmth of her skin. Instead, I just watched her fingers curl slightly around her tote bag, noticed the small quiver in her shoulder, and let my chest tighten with the things I didn't say. Finally, she looked up at me, eyes wide, searching, and the words hung between us, unfinished. "Are we?" she whispered, letting the question trail off, fragile as spun glass. I couldn't answer. All I could do was feel the weight of it, the pull of what might happen, and the ache of knowing some lines might never be crossed. Or once crossed, never uncrossed. She didn't answer my calls for 2 days. I left messages I couldn't bring myself to send, save drafts that felt like confessions waiting to rot in digital limbo. Every morning, I checked the mailbox, half expecting a note, a sketch, a word. Nothing. When I saw her again, it was at the grocery store. She turned down an aisle before I could catch her, shoulders tighter than usual, eyes flicking anywhere but mine. She had a bag tucked under one arm, and she moved like she had somewhere urgent to be. I caught up finally, careful not to seem too eager. "Hey, everything okay?" Her hand paused over the cereal shelf. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was clipped, uncertain. She didn't meet my eyes. I noticed the wedding ring tucked away in her tote bag, the one she'd never mentioned. A flash of context. a detail that explained the shift and yet made my chest ache in ways I couldn't name. Busy? I asked, because I needed words, any words, to bridge the distance. Always, she said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Life, complicated. I wanted to ask what she meant. About the ring. About everything. But I didn't. I watched the way her fingers gripped the bag strap, the subtle tremor in her wrist, the way she kept stepping ahead, away from me. I imagined all the scenarios in my head. She was leaving, not ready, had someone else waiting. Or maybe she was trying to protect me, or herself, from crossing a line neither of us could undo. I followed silently for a block, then stopped. She glanced back once, but didn't linger, didn't smile, didn't speak. I wanted to call her, to text her, to apologize for not being more careful, for being too eager, for wanting too much. I typed a message, then deleted it. Something simple. I saw you. Are you okay? And then, I left it unsent. I walked home, feeling the weight of empty streets, the way silence stretched longer than it had to. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, but it didn't comfort me. I imagined her sitting there instead of me, reading her sketches, lost in her own world, and I felt both relief and hollow longing. For 2 nights, I went through the motions: breakfast, coffee, scrolling, waiting. Not heartbroken, not angry, just paused, suspended. The apartment hallway smelled faintly of detergent, the faint echo of her presence lingering like a ghost. The chair where I imagined she might sit remained empty, the door she might have knocked left closed. I realized I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. And maybe that was worse than any definitive ending, because endings are clean. They hurt. They bleed. This was a wound that didn't move, just waited. The rain came softly that evening, tapping against the kitchen window in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. She was there, standing by the counter, peeling an apple with slow, deliberate movements. Steam curled from the mug she had set down beside her, faintly sweetened, smelling faintly of cinnamon. I wanted to leave, walk away, and let the ache settle into a quiet corner of my chest. But I didn't. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her, careful not to misstep. You came, she said, not looking up, voice low and measured. I did, I said. I wanted to. My words hung awkwardly, unfinished, like a sentence cut mid-thought. She paused, knife in hand, and for a moment, I thought she might put it down and leave. But she didn't. She leaned against the counter, just enough, and met my gaze briefly. I shouldn't, she whispered. Then almost immediately, but I do. I swallowed, the lump in my throat heavier than I expected. My hands twitched at my sides. The temptation to reach out, to close the space, was overwhelming. But I waited, letting her set the pace, letting the moment breathe. I've thought about it, I said finally. Every day, the what-ifs, the mistakes, and still, I come back. She let the words settle. The silence after them wasn't empty. It was charged, fragile. She glanced down at the counter, her fingers tracing the edge absent-mindedly. You're younger, she said again, but this time it wasn't a warning. More like an acknowledgement. And you're older. Experienced. That's why I hesitate, I admitted. But I'm not leaving. Not tonight. She didn't reply at first, just tilted her head, watching me in the way people do when they're measuring risk, weighing trust. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the line of tension in her jaw. Then, quietly, she reached for mine. A small gesture, barely noticeable, but it said everything without a word. My fingers brushed hers, then held. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I don't know how to do this, she murmured, almost to herself. Neither do I said softly. And somehow that was enough. Enough to bridge the unspoken distance. Enough to let the moment exist without collapsing it into something it wasn't yet. We stood like that, fingers linked, letting the rain and silence carry us. No grand declarations. No promises. Just presence. Finally, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. Not a smile that fixed everything. Not a smile that guaranteed tomorrow. Just a human smile. Real. Quiet. Enough. Okay, I said, my voice low. Okay, she echoed. And in that, all the tension, the waiting, the small agonies, felt briefly suspended. Not resolved, not perfect, just acknowledged. The first time I saw her again after everything, it was raining lightly, the streets slick and shiny. She had her tote bag slung over one shoulder and a sketchbook tucked under her arm, the same one she'd almost forgotten months ago. I waved, and she smiled, small, private, like she'd been saving it just for me. We ended up at the bench outside the bookstore, the same one where everything had almost tipped over into something reckless. I brought a thermos of black coffee. She brought 2 mugs. We didn't say much. Didn't need to. The rain pattered against the umbrella we shared, the quiet rhythm between us more familiar than words could ever be. I made it this time, she said, handing me a mug. I know, I said. And I did. She always did. Time had moved quietly between us. Days became weeks, weeks became months. We saw each other in small routines. Coffee at 8:47 a.m., her laughing softly at my clumsy attempts to stir sugar, folding laundry side by side, leaving a space between our shoulders that was exactly right. No urgency, no grand gestures, just presence. She taught me to notice details again. The way steam rises from a cup, how light filters through leaves, the faint creak of a floorboard that means someone is home. And I taught her to pause, to linger on a sentence, a sketch, a moment. One evening, she leaned her head on my shoulder while we sat on the couch, sketchbooks open, coffee mugs cooling. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain. I didn't need to say it. She didn't either. The past, the pauses, the near misses, the empty seats, the unsent texts hadn't vanished. They'd become part of the way we fit together. The quiet knowledge of risk, of age, of life's little complications made every small touch feel deliberate, safe, earned. I remembered the near confessions on the bench, the half-kisses, the moments suspended between fear and desire. And here we were, months later, and everything had settled into a rhythm neither of us could have planned. I reached over and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch. She smiled faintly. You always notice, she said. I always notice, I agreed. No fireworks. No declarations. Just the warmth of someone who had seen me in all the quiet corners of my own heart and stayed. As I poured another cup of black coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, I thought about all the small gestures that had led us here. The thermos, the bench, the unsent messages, the rain, the folded laundry. They were not dramatic, but they were ours. And in that, I understood. Not everything needs a grand ending. Some love is found in the quiet, the ordinary, the carefully shared moments that stretch into years. I took a sip, and she leaned closer, fingers brushing mine. And in that soft, unspoken acknowledgement, we both knew the truth we didn't need to say. Some things, I realized, are only ever fully understood between 2 people who live them. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?